Hello, it's Pastor Doug, and we're here for our study of the Gospel of Mark, the Good News. We're in the 14th chapter of this Gospel, looking at Jesus as he's getting ready to go into Jerusalem. We're picking up reading from the New American Standard Version. Whatever version you have is perfect. And so just read along with me. I'll be just using this first part of it while he's in the city of Bethany. And we're going to look what takes place there. Starting with verse 1. Now, the Passover and unleavened bread were 2 days away, and the chief priests and scribes were seeking how to seize him by stealth and kill him. For they were saying, not during the festival, otherwise there might be a riot of the people. While he was in Bethany at the home of Simon the leper, and reclining at the table, there came a woman with an alabaster vial of very costly perfume of pure nard, and she broke the vial and poured it over his head. But some were indignantly remarking to one another, why has this perfume been wasted? For this perfume might have been sold for over 300 denarii, and the money given to the poor. And they were scolding her. But Jesus said, let her alone. Why do you bother her? She has done a good deed to me. For you always have the poor with you, and whenever you wish, you can do good to them, but you do not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for the burial. Truly I say to you, wherever the gospel is preached in the world, the whole world, what this woman has done will be spoken of in memory of her. Then Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12, went off to the chief priests in order to betray him to them. They were glad when they heard this and promised to give him money. And he began seeking how to betray him at an opportune time. That'll probably be enough for us for this week. It's got some great aspects of the gospel, the good news as Jesus gets over. It was getting close to Passover. Passover was that feast, and it was just the first. The unleavened bread was what carried on for the rest of the week. Recalling whenever God delivered the children of Israel, brought them up out of the land of Egypt, how the death angel passed over them whenever they took the lamb and killed it and put the blood on the post. And they came into Jerusalem and celebrated every year. There were 3 festivals that every male had to come to Jerusalem for, and Passover was one of them. On the heels of Passover, was with just a one-night celebration, was this unleavened bread, a time when they did not eat within 11 because of the haste that they left in, and they celebrated that for another 7 days. It was in the month of Nisan, and it was from the 14th day until the 21st day. And so we know that this was, I guess, on the 12th day, because Passover and the unleavened bread were still 2 days away. Now, it doesn't tell us which day of the week it, but we know by going back and looking at Exodus that Passover, this month that it was in, was also the beginning of their calendar year. It was the first month of the first of their year, and this was the first festival that they celebrated in their year. It was a spring celebration. Of course, they set their calendar on a lunar. That's why whenever we try to figure out where the date is for Easter, we're going all over the map because it was a lunar-based calendar. And so it moves around a little bit. And so they did that. They'd make adjustments to their calendar to get it back on track like everything else. But essentially, we're talking about around March, April, in that time frame. And so it's kind of interesting. They began their year in the spring of the year, and it went all the way through winter, which was the end of the year. I just kind of like that. But that's how their year was set up. And they were beginning to celebrate their new year. And this first celebration, when everyone came into Jerusalem, they travel in from all over. And as they were doing, Jerusalem just filled up with people. And when you get a lot of people together, you got all kinds of ideas, and those who are in charge are hoping they get through it without any disturbances. And they had been having disturbances at every Passover when Jesus showed up. He was always doing something. The people loved him, they didn't. And they just knew, here we go again. So the chief priests and the scribes were trying to figure out what they were going to do at this one. And they were just sort of thinking about it among themselves, still a couple of days away. And they would love to get rid of Jesus. And so they were seeking him. This word for seeking is the same word whenever we talk about us seeking Jesus, being zealous about something, seeking it out. They were really trying to figure out how to seize him, how to do it quietly. Mine says by stealth. How to do it as is so it doesn't draw notice. And so this doulos word is really a word for like craftiness. How can we figure out how to do this and get away with it? Um, and uh, and in particular, not only did they want to seize him in Cratero, not only wanted to grab hold of him, but they wanted to kill him. And that was their intention. They were sitting around, knew it was going to happen, and they thought, you know what? This Passover and unleavened bread would be a whole lot better if we could just grab Jesus and kill him before anything got started. And that's exactly what they tried to do. They were saying, well, we got to do it now before the festival begins. We can't do it during the festival because the time he shows up, all those people from all over are going to be coming in, and they've got those stories about Jesus. They think he's a prophet. They think he's the next king. They're going to be talking about how he heals people and how his power is from God. And of course, they don't know anything, right? So we've got to do this. We got to do it craftily. We got to do it before the festival starts. Because if we do this while the festival is going on, we're going to have a riot on our hands. And they were afraid of a riot. A noisy tumult that would come up because it would get Rome's attention. Because since they were all getting together and the likelihood that that was going to get out of control, the Romans leaders would come up from Caesarea to Jerusalem. They were there to keep the peace. They were there to make sure everything was done as it should be, decent and in order. And they said they were going to be providing the police to make sure these people who were celebrating a lot of nationalism at this point and a lot of throwing off the suppressors, which didn't make Rome look too good. They were there to come in. And so, and things were coming together, well, we might say for fireworks. And that's exactly what happened. But we're still 2 days away. Jesus, evidently with the disciples, had come the traditional way down from the Galilee, following along down by the Jordan River, coming up through Jericho, making their way up to Bethany. And on his way to Jerusalem in the past, he often stopped in Bethany. It was just a couple of miles out of town. And in particular, he was there at the home of Simon the leper. And there's a lot of question as to who this guy was. Because in the past, we hear that he stays in a house. We aren't told whose house it is. Mary and Martha are there. Lazarus are there. And those are the people he usually interacts with when he goes and stays in a house in Bethany. He stays at their house. And so there are a lot of Bible scholars who say perhaps this house where Mary and Martha and Lazarus live is Simon's house. We don't know, and we really don't know much about this Simon. Now, some of the parallel passages in the Gospels use Lazarus instead of Simon, so there's some people who say maybe Simon the leper and Lazarus were the same people, also known by different names. Maybe Simon was their dad. Maybe he was someone else related to him in the family that we just don't hear about until now. And we're not even sure about this Simon. We know that if he's in the house and everybody else is there, that he's no longer a leper if he's at the house, but we're not even told that he's actually there. We're just told it's in the home of Simon the leper. We just assume that if it's his house, he's there too. I think it's a good assumption, but we just don't really know who this guy is other than he's willing to host Jesus. And it could be that he was one of those guys who Jesus had healed of leprosy. And so, having experienced the power of God, he was willing to trust. He was persuaded that Jesus was who he claimed to be, and he was doing whatever he could to support Jesus in his ministry. So he opens up his home to Jesus and his disciples. So it's got to be a pretty good size home. And they come in, and they are reclining at table. That is, they're laying against the table, according to this word. It doesn't even say at the table. It just says that they're lying against, just a single word. But we assume this word, because of the context, that it was at dinner time. By context, that there got to be a table around. Probably one of those U-shaped kind of tables that they used back then. Could be, when you go over there, and archaeologists will say it's one that was probably made out of stone, because they had a lot of stone in that area. And it would be sort of a permanent dining room. They would sit around the outside, and someone would come in the middle of it. This isn't the Last Supper. This is 2 days before, and they're having this meal. And of those who are helping serve comes this woman. And Mark doesn't identify her for us at all. The only thing he does is identify what she does. She's carrying an alabaston. Some mine says it's an alabaster vial. Some will say an alabaster vase. Some translations will say an alabaster box. It's just in the nominative form, and it's the alabastron. Now, they would use alabaster because it was a good material for, well, putting ointments into. It wouldn't go through it. It wasn't porous. And they made them different ways. There were some, you'll read in different commentaries, where it had a long neck and you had to break the neck off in order to get it out. But that isn't always supported in archaeology. They made boxes, and they would seal the boxes, and so whenever you broke it, you were breaking the seal to get the lid off to be able to get the ointment out, and you would get all of it. They certainly have jars of alabaster that they've found. Usually you would be able to stop it up some way, use it, and then you could, well, of course, use it again. And so there's a lot of things about the story that, as someone translates it, they sort of add some very plausible kinds of things. We do know what's inside this alabaston. And it was a very expensive, lots of high price, a lot of money in this one. It was a myrrh, a perfume, and it was of, mine says, pure nard. Using nard, we'd say spikenard is kind of the understanding of what it was. It was a very expensive spice at the time that was harvested and shipped in, and it was something that they used especially in their burial customs and preparing the body. You remember, things were done a little different back then. They'd often have a tomb area, and it would have one place where you would open it up. You would put the body in on this table. Then you would put perfumes and things in the body. Then you would close it back up, and you would just let the body rot away. And in the right amount of time, you would go back in, and then you would take the person off of those laying on that tablet. You would take their bones, and you would put them into an ossuary, a small box, and then that box would go into what we might call a catacomb. And so this wasn't the kind of grave we might think about it, but that was their practices back then. It was like a cave that they could close off and they could seal, and they put all those spices in there because, man, when the body decays, it stinks. And they would put the spices in there, they would wrap it up, they'd seal it off because they didn't want anything else getting in there to mess around with the body. And they wanted it to be preserved, open it back up, and come in and take care of it. So that was going to be happening. And so they're there. This lady comes in, she's got this vase, box, this alabaston. It's full of nard. And mine says pure nard. Again, sort of an interesting word. It's a pistikos. Pistuo is the word that we translate faith or belief. And so it's a word at its root that means to be persuaded. And if you're persuaded of something, you trust it to work. So that's how we get faith and belief out of it. And that's the primary way it's used. But it's used here to describe that it's a trusted nard. It's not a fake. It's the good stuff. I guess there might have been people who would cut it down, who would try to make some money, and wasn't a very trusted source. But this was the good stuff. And she breaks the alabaston. She didn't have to do that, depending on which one it was, but she intentionally does it. And this word for break is a word that means to crush. She ruins this hold. And when she does it, she pours it down on over his head. There's a part of it almost, it's kind of like an egg. and you just crush that whole thing and everything comes out of it. There's no intention of doing anything else. There's no preserving. There's all of this is going off. It's not, I'm just going to get a little bit, but we're going to use all of it, probably a lot more than was needed. And then you have to understand that smell is going to permeate that house. It's not just oil and ointment, but this is the kind of pungent perfume that can cover up the smell of death. I mean, if you ever walked by a body and bath works thing in the mall, nothing compared to what was going on here. This was huge. So she does this. It gets everybody's attention, just what she's doing. And then the overwhelming smell comes to them. And they were very, mine says, indignant. They were very upset at what they were seeing taking place, and to one another. Kind of interesting. It doesn't actually say they said or remarked. It just says some were indignant to one another. Now, depending on which gospel account, like Matthew said, some of the disciples, but John only identifies Judas. And so whoever these among the disciples were, we know that Judas was one of them. And what's spoken from these guys who are upset is, why has this perfume been wasted? I mean, and this is a word that means destroyed. Why did you do this? What's going on here? And they give their reasonings. Anytime we see someone else do something that we don't like, we give a reason of why they shouldn't have done it, whether that's our real reason or not. In fact, a lot of people who make the argument for reason never really disclose their real reason, because very often their real reasons are selfish reasons. And that's what we see happening here. Here they are, and they are looking at this, and their reason is they're looking at the amount and the size and everything, and they're saying that was worth 300 denarii. Now, denarii was equal to a day's wage. So how expensive was this perfume? Think about your day's wage, what you make in a day, multiply that by 300, and that's what you get for the cost of this perfume. It was expensive stuff. It was more expensive than probably what you spend on your perfume. And if you had perfume that was that expensive and someone came in and they broke the bottle, you might be a little upset about it. Now, the other thing about this is that they often used perfumes and other kinds of things as a ways to exchange wealth in those days because they didn't have to pay taxes. It wasn't money. It wasn't a product, wasn't a produce. So they could carry this with them, not have to pay taxes on it. If they sold it, you get taxes all of a sudden. So there's also sort of a commerce kind of aspect to this story that doesn't always come out because these guys are looking at it. And they say not only could have been sold and we could have gotten 300 denarii on it, who knows where they're getting that evaluation, we could have given that money to the poor. And when John reports it, he says he wanted to go see it go into the till because he used to help himself to it. Motivation, for scolding someone like this woman. He had some self-interest going on. Most of us do when we stop and look at it. In fact, next time something happens that you get really upset about it and you want to justify it, and whatever justification you use, ask yourself, is that really why I'm upset? Or do I have some selfishness that's in here that's making me act this way? Because that's what was making these guys get so upset. And Jesus takes this expression and he clarifies what's just happened. He says, hey guys, leave her alone. Why? Why are you bothering her? And it's a term here, this parkeets, to cause something to be along the side of. Why are you doing that? Why are you troubling her? Why are you hitting at her? Don't you realize that all she's done is something good? So and this is a good work to me. You like to do good things, you like to do good works, and this is just a kolon ergon, a good work to me. He goes, guys, if you're really concerned about the poor, you've got the poor with you all the time. There's going to be plenty of time for you guys to take care of the poor. In fact, you could have done it yesterday, you could have done it the day before, you could have been doing it last week, you can be doing it next week. You're really upset about the poor? Do something about it. That's a great thing to be doing. But you don't always have me with you. And she recognizes that. And she's done something good for me. Well, we want to do good things for Jesus whenever we have the opportunity to do so. She has done what she could. She anointed my body before the burial. Jesus speaks about his burial in a matter-of-fact kind of way. Prophetic, we might say. He was getting there. And there may be a part that knew that Jesus was going to be resurrected before the women who showed up at the tomb who came to prepare the body would get a chance to do it. Now, there was a certain amount that was done the night before. You have that part of the story of the gospel. But the women who showed up in what we call Easter morning showed up to open the tomb and do it right and have all the spices with them. And there is some scriptures that talk about Jesus being anointed before his birth. So this is also fulfilling scripture, is an expression of gratitude unbounded. Whenever you give God thanks, do you do it over in an abundant kind of way? Or do you give him thanks with the minimum? Sometimes we'll talk about that, and we'll even sometimes relate it to how we give to the church. Well, I give a tithe. Well, great, it's a minimum. It's a good starting place. Well, what about the rest? This girl didn't save anything. Kind of like the widow, just puts in all she has. Um, she puts everything in. And I think so. That's why Jesus looks at that and says, whenever the gospel is preached, the good news that transforms people, that forgives their sins, and they are so thankful for what God has done to them that they respond with gratitude, we're going to talk about this woman who did so, and we're going to remember her. And she is going to be an example for us. Think of what God has done for you and how you've been giving him thanks. Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, gets up and leaves. He can't believe his eyes. He can't believe his ears. He can't believe the correction that he just received. His selfishness is at work here. And so he gets up and he goes off and he goes to the chief priests with the very intention of turning Jesus over to them to give along the side of paradidomi, which gets translated betrayed, and rightly so. Um, and he is going to betray Jesus to them. And when these chief priests and these scribes who had been trying to figure out what are they going to do, how are we going to get rid of Jesus before Passover, before everything begins, how are we going to do this? Judas shows up, one of Jesus' disciples. They're probably thinking, thank you, God. You've given us exactly what we wanted. God is at work, but he's at work bringing about his will, not the will of the Pharisees and the chief priests and the scribes, and not even the will of Judas. He's using them to accomplish his will. Jesus has to be betrayed. He prophesied it. He has to die. They're going to kill him, just like their intentions were, so that he can rise again. It's his sacrifice, his blood that turns away the death angel, and we experience a real Passover because of what Jesus has done. They promise to give Judas money. You interested in money? We're going to give you money. We know the rest of the story. He ends up getting 30 pieces of silver, quite a handsome sum for what he's doing. And since they believe Judas is going to do what he says, they trust him. They're persuaded that he's going to do the right thing. And then Judas leaves and he begins to seek. Get that word again. He's seeking, just like at the first of this chapter, the scribes and the chief priests were seeking. He begins to seek along with them how to betray him at a good time. A good time. And that's what happens. And so it's our goal to recognize that we can be easily deceived by our love of the things of this world. It can get our perspectives warped. It can put our focus on the wrong thing. We can self-justify our actions and be completely in the wrong. We want to be like the others. We want to recognize, like this woman, who Jesus is and what he has done, and our thankfulness to him, and we should let it overflow from our lives. That's where we're going to end in our study for the day. I hope that God blesses you and he gives you the opportunity, and you take it to give him thanks for all he has done for you. We'll talk to you next week. Thank you.